If we just focus on amino acid density, as one would expect based on previous work, birds fed the more amino acid dense diet perform better than birds fed the reduced amino acid dense diet. And what's really neat is that these different diets represent feed at various locations throughout the feed line, right? So if nutrients are segregating, then bird growth and performance may be different depending on where they're located in the house.
Welcome to another episode of the Poultry Nutrition Blackbelt Podcast. I'm your host, Kelly Walmsley, today, and I'm joined by the newly hooded Dr. Poholsky. Hey, Courtney, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you, Kelly?
Good, and congratulations on the big achievement.
Thank you.
I'm so excited that you're joining again today to follow up from your first episode that you did. You were talking about really what pellet quality meant to turkeys, right? In part of your dissertation work. And so some of the other work that you've done, which is also work that I really love, is work on ingredient segregation and nutrient segregation in the houses. So do you want to tell us a little bit about the work that you've done in that area?
So we really wanted to better understand feed and nutrient distribution throughout commercial poultry houses. And it has also been suggested that improving pellet quality reduces the segregation of feed particles and nutrients. So that's another reason why we wanted to conduct these field studies. And I ran a series of experiments using both low pellet to fine ratio feed, which may actually be considered the industry standard. It was about 65% pellets. And we also had a high pellet to fine ratio feed. We got up to about 80% pellets. And we augured those diets throughout short and long feed lines, 250 feet and 500 feet long. And that experimental design essentially created 4 different scenarios. And what we found was auguring that low pellet to fine ratio feed throughout 500-foot long feed lines, that actually resulted in the greatest degree of variability in amino acid concentrations and phytase activity. So if I talk about lysine concentration actually varied by 11% throughout the house, and phytase activity varied by about 50%. So that's after auguring that low pellet to fine ratio feed in long feed lines. Now, on the other hand, amino acid and phytase activity segregation were not apparent after auguring that higher pellet to fine ratio feed throughout those shorter 250-foot long feed lines. So basically, we concluded that on-farm nutrient segregation, it's impacted by the initial pellet to fine ratio of the feed and the feed line length.
Proven on the farm, trusted on the plate, let our technologies help make your production goals a reality. Learn from the experts how carbohydrates can improve nutrient utilization, gut health technologies differ by type, and how liquid smoke can light your bird performance on fire. Carey isn't just leading in animal agriculture, we're innovating it.
Interesting. And so all of these diets, they had post-pellet liquid application, right?
Yes, phytase was applied post-pelleting, and a portion of the soybean oil was applied post-pelleting as well.
Gotcha. And so, that's all well and good, right? And we've done some work like that in our lab, and we've, kind of established some of those same differences. I'm not sure that, if my recollection serves me right, I'm not sure we found that degree of amino acid differences that you did. So that's really fascinating on that side. But we took it out and then collected some of that feed and then fed it to birds and saw some differences. And you guys did the same thing, right?
Yeah, we did something similar because, the next obvious question is, does this nutrient segregation impact the bird? Or maybe,
does it matter?
Yeah, does it matter at the end of the day? So we did apply that variation in amino acids and phytase activity that we saw in the field to a university setting. So we did conduct a live bird experiment here at Penn State We used a 10% difference in amino acid concentration, and we had 3 different levels of phytase activity. And overall, we found that the variation in phytase activity had no impact to broiler performance or tibia ash. So we looked at bone mineralization as well. And, this was based on a standard dose of phytase, and the results make sense if we think of previous work. Tibia ash was measured at or after peak bone mineralization. The birds were provided a starter diet with adequate calcium and phosphorus. So all those factors likely impacted the phytase activity results. But if we just focus on amino acid density, as one would expect based on previous work, birds fed the more amino acid dense diet performed better than birds fed the reduced amino acid dense diet. And what's really neat is that these different diets represent feed at various locations throughout the feed line, right? So if nutrients are segregating, then bird growth and performance may be different depending on where they're located in the house.
Right. And we know that there's going to be differences really anyways, too, because, you got birds that are on the fan end, they're going to get more light, and a lot of times they're eating more, and so they may be cooler at the cool cell, at the fan end also than as opposed to the cool cell end. And so there's already these environmental differences throughout the house, just depending on how it's made. And then in the season, I guess, also. And then you throw this into the equation that, your feed quality, of course, we know it's important, but then the feed quality it's not only just the quality of the feed, that's the physical quality, it's the nutrition that's also being impacted potentially. And so I guess walk me through, did you guys look at anything with only mixer added and no post pellet application?
We did not, but that would be the next step, because we do believe that there is an impact to nutrient distribution, whether you're applying an additive or an ingredient at the mixer versus post-pelleting. So in all of our field studies, the phytase in particular was always applied post-pelleting. So we did tend to see that segregation in most cases, where that phytase would kind of be more concentrated in the fines compared to the pellets.
In the work that we did mixer added phytase for both the post pellet and the mixer treatments that we had. But it was a little bit confounded because even though we thought that the phytase, it was a little bit more on the experimental for the mixer added one. But we thought it was heat stable, and it really did not seem to be heat stable. So our research came back a little bit more confounded on that side, because we had less segregation overall though with the mixer added, but we had higher segregation with post pellet like you all had. So I think it does matter in the where you're putting those ingredients. I guess, did you guys elaborate much on what you think is going on with those, with the feed as it's traveling throughout the auger, and then what's making that feed segregate?
Yeah. So what's contributing to the nutrient segregation as that feed is being augered throughout the feed line? We always see in all the field studies that we did, a slug of fines ends up in those first few feed pans. And you see those fines kind of built up in the feed hopper as well. So as that auger is moving, it's going to push those pellets to the end of the house, as long as that feed auger is in good condition. If it's not, it's probably going to break down the pellets, and you might see a reduction in percent pellets as you move from the hopper to the feed line. But we think that more dense feed particles become more concentrated in those fines.
Yeah, I think that seems I think it kind of tracks with what we were seeing too. And to comment on what you said with depending on the auger, we had done some work and looked at the impact of the augers. And I think you all did the same thing. And we found, especially in our situation, in the commercial houses that we have at Mississippi State, that we had one auger in particular that was especially, or feed line, that I guess the auger was just especially harsh on those pellets because it was way more detrimental to the feed quality and segregation, the consequential segregation effects that came along with that. What did you all see?
In most of the field studies, we did see pretty consistent feed quality throughout the feed lines. In most cases, we had 4 feed lines in the house we were looking at. But, in some cases, the feed line that was furthest away from where the feed bins were did behave differently. But it's not that it was more aggressive to the feed. We just obtained different results. And I think that goes back to what's going on inside the feed bin and how feed is being augered out. It's filling feed line by feed line in cases, and different proportions of pellets and fines are going to come out of that feed bin over time. And that may just have contributed to what was going on within each feed line.
Sure. Implications of this type of research. What do you think needs to be? I mean, you talked a little bit about maybe some of the next steps with mixer added research, but what about from a standpoint, do you think we need to change how we feed the houses or, anything else? Should there be that kind of a radical shift that needs to occur? Or what do you think, big picture, for those listeners out there?
Yeah, I think now more producers and integrators are more concerned with feed quality now in the house. And for those folks who are interested in monitoring nutrient distribution and actually defining what is actually presented to the birds in the house, I think that at Penn State, we have outlined a pretty good feed sampling procedure, an on-farm feed sampling procedure for service technicians to carry out, so that they can collect feed samples, send them to the feed mill, have them analyzed for pellet to fine ratio. Most feed mills have machines to do pellet durability analyses, so that they can actually improve their communication and determine what the birds are actually eating in the house. Because I think overall what we need to do is improve communication between the grower, nutritionist, and the feed mill. And I think that's the way to do it, is to collect these on-farm feed samples and figure out what these birds are actually eating.
And I guess also to follow up of what you had mentioned on, with your grow out trial and the results from that, to kind of really see if it matters from a nutrient segregation standpoint. Like you said, you didn't find much difference in calcium and phosphorus and tibia ashing, I guess, from changing from changing calcium and phosphorus, but manipulating the phytase that was in the diet that was more congruent to what you saw of the segregation in the field. And you didn't see a difference in tibia ash, but you had practical diets at that time, and the birds were not in that stage of growth. And so it gives you did, though, see differences in amino acids between those diets, and 10% reduction in digestible lysine, right? In the performance of the birds. And so it gives you a snapshot of what could be going on, but you also think about there are things that happen in the feed mill, and ingredients vary in their quality and their nutrition and bioavailability. And so if you're in a scenario where something happens nutrient-wise, where your diet's leaving the feed mill is not up to spec unknowingly, and then it goes out in the field and it's poor feed quality and then is augered throughout the house, then you're likely to see much more drastic results from that. And so it may not be an issue, or it would be a small issue, from a day-to-day kind of thing. But if there was some kind of error in the mill or bad quality ingredients that came in, then it could really have some bigger implications in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I'm so excited that we got a chance to chat today and talk about this. It's really, really interesting work, and I'm so glad that you all have been doing it. And we need more and more people kind of looking at this to really be able to figure out from a broader scope about what's going on with segregation work. So bravo to y'all. And thanks again for joining me, Courtney, today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And thank you to our listeners out there today for this. This has been another episode of the Poultry Nutrition Blackbelt Podcast. We'll catch you next time.